principles?
For me, it's more of an experiential thing, as in I've listened to this intuition before and it has given me good advice before. And every time I listen to it, it gives me good advice that turns out to be true.
Okay, well then I would also say that's very much akin to the Socratic daemon, right? So Socrates said in the Apologia, when he was asked, this is his trial when he's going to be put to death, he's explaining why he didn't run away. Because the Athenians said they were going to kill him, and they gave him plenty of warning. And they didn't want to kill him. They wanted him to go away. And he knew that, and so did his friends. And all of his friends were telling him to get the hell out of town. And he went and had a conversation with his daemon, which is this spirit of intuition that you're describing. And his daemon said, "You can't run." And he thought, well, what the hell do you mean I can't run? They want me to run and they're going to kill me. But Socrates lays it out in the Apologia. He says, that it was widely established in Athens and elsewhere that Socrates was a singular person. And even the Delphic Oracle had said that, and she said he was singular because he knew that he didn't know. He was radically humble, radically ignorant. But he said that one of the things that made him different was that he always listened to the voice of this daemon. And that's the same word as demon, but it means spirit fundamentally in that context. He always listened. That's what made him different from other men. Now, the question is, what is the nature of that guiding spirit?
That's right.
Now, your objection is, well, why do we have to consider that God? And I would say that is exactly the question. And even what would it mean to consider it God is the question. Okay, so imagine, so here's a set of problems. Now, you have this intuition that guides you and you're willing to abide by it, but you have an integration problem, like everyone does, which is, well, you might be guided by beauty and you might be guided by truth and you might be guided by lust and you might be guided by envy and you might be guided by hunger. And like there's a lot of different animating principles that are going to be warring around you. And if they're not integrated into something that's unified, then they're disintegrated and you're going to be pulled apart. Now, the other question you're asking is, why does that have to be conceptualized as God? Okay, so to answer that question, we'd have to do something like a technical analysis of what it means to consider something God. So I would say, well, something has to be put in the highest place. And the highest place is the place that takes predominance over all other places. And so if you're going to be guided by the spirit of your intuition, then by necessity, at least at that moment, you put it in the highest place. And that's to elevate it to the peak of Mount Sinai, symbolically speaking. It's to allow it to be the eye at the top of the pyramid through which you see. It's both of those things. And then I would say technically, and I learned this from Jung, is that regardless of what you call it, this animating spirit that you put in the highest place is functionally equivalent to God. And we could look, the sophisticated religious thinkers know perfectly well that God is beyond both name and conceptualization. So this isn't a reductive enterprise. It's
Jordan, can I ask you a question?
Yes, please do.
Why does this thing have to be outside of me?
It doesn't.
Right. So if this thing doesn't have to be outside of me...
But we'll return to that. Let's return to that.
But let me follow that logical sequence out.
Yeah.
If this thing doesn't have to be outside of me, is it possible that this intuition is a part of me that is giving me additional information that consciously I'm not present to?
Sure. Well,
and therefore, the idea that we have a God to whom we have some sort of shared affiliation or some shared connection through him seems to me to be unnecessary.
Okay. So let's delve into that a little bit, because I think that's a very germane question. Well, the first point of distinction is, what exactly do you mean by inside of you, right? Because that's a metaphor and it's not obvious what it means. Do you mean inside the meat of your brain? Do you mean in the neural connections? Like exactly what does inside mean? It
Yes.
means inside the psychological landscape, right?
It
So
means
is it
it's
inside the
produced
domain
by
of
my
imagination?
body and brain, right? This is a product in
Right.
the way that my thoughts are constructed by my brain and body to some
Yeah.
extent. This is also a product of that, just through a different communication system.
Okay, so fine. So let's take the biological route then. And that's fine. Let's just make it strictly biological then for the time being. So then you run into the problem of the intrinsic logos of the world. So let's say that you are conferring with something that's revealing itself within you that's biologically predicated. Well, then you might say, well, that's the wisdom of the world making itself manifest through the material realm. And that's really what the Greeks believed. Like the Greek notion of logos was that there was an intrinsic order to the material world. And that if you allowed that order to make itself manifest within you, that would provide you with the most appropriate possible guidance. And the idea of the Socratic daemon is a reflection of the logos of the intrinsic structure of the world. And so the notion would be, well, if you're in tune with the structure of the world as it reveals itself to you biologically, then you're acting in harmony with being itself. I'm perfectly happy with that formulation. There was a Judeo-Christian logos idea that got overlaid on top of that. When there was the, what would you call it, reconciliation between the Greek worldview and the Judeo-Christian worldview. And it adds an extra dimension to that. And you can tell me what you think about this. So in the Christian formulation particularly, Christ is the logos. That's a different idea than the logos or the logic of the world. But the idea there is that forthright confrontation with the catastrophe of existence will reveal the logos of existence to you. And so that's why those ideas could be overlaid. So imagine that you're going to consult your intuition, right? But here's the precondition. And you tell me if you think this is right or wrong. You have to admit that you have a problem first. So you basically have to admit that you've missed the mark and that you're somewhat lost. So that's a humility, and it's an opening up to revelation. That's an attitude, a psychological attitude. Now, and that's a self-sacrificial attitude, because if you're going to learn something from the revelation, part of you is going to have to go, the part of you that's wrong. So you have to bring the psychological animating spirit to bear, which is humility and openness to correction, and then the voice of intuition will make itself manifest from, let's say, below.